Okay, new studio, who dis? I back in November, did a guest lecture at Linnaeus University in Sweden, and there were a couple of questions that came through that lecture that I think were really interesting to talk about. So the lecture was on universal design. As you probably already know, that's my area of expertise, and it really focuses in on how we can create a society that everyone can participate equally in. And so we can think about that on a number of different levels. We can think of it kind of on a larger scale systems level, and we can think of it all the way down to kind of a micro level user interface of technologies or ways in which the built environment are created in terms of architecture and things like that. But one of the questions that came through was regarding an acronym I used on one of my slides, and the acronym was CRPD. And so the student just wanted to know what does the acronym stand for, and I think it's a good opportunity here to talk about that and to talk about how it relates to our human rights as kind of individuals in society, and how it relates to broader issues around the ways in which we create new things, anything. So CRPD stands for the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So it's a disability-specific human right convention, and it's one of the most recent UN conventions when it comes to human rights. I don't think there's been another human rights convention that's come out after that. And it was a really, really important milestone in the disability rights movement because it was the first time that on a UN level, that the rights of persons with disabilities were clearly articulated. And there's a lot of discussion and kind of maybe even argument around whether or not that means new rights, whether or not that convention was trying to create a new set of rights for persons with disabilities, or whether it was already just kind of codifying the existing set of human rights, but very specifically saying that this is also about disability. And so the basic unanimous agreement is more the second, that it's just about taking the existing human rights that we all have and that we all enjoy and saying that this also applies to issues related to disability. So the CRPD, Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities, now there's a specific provision in the CRPD that's really important for anyone involved in universal design. And that provision deals with how the governments around the world take this human right and put it into practice. And all it basically says is that governments all over the world, whomever has signed this treaty, have an obligation to do research and development of universally designed goods, services, blah, 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 so that it betters society, more or less. So I think it's really important for us to think about that for, again, those who are involved in universal design, that when we are doing our research, when we're innovating, when we're working with entrepreneurs, when we're working with industry to create universally designed goods and services, that we are actually fulfilling, in some small respect, a UN human rights mandate. Now, there's a couple of other key things that I want to unpack here, and one is the concept of disability. Now, it might seem, if you don't have a disability, that this is something far removed from your experience, and hey, what does it really matter? My focus is on other aspects of life and society, and so disability, while I recognize it might be important, you might be thinking that it's just not so important to me. But I want to point out why you should pay attention to this issue. And that is because as a society, we are living much, 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 much longer than we ever have before. And what that basically means is that you're going to live longer than your parents or grandparents on average. You as individuals may or may not, but as a population, we will live on average longer than our parents or grandparents. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that as we age, we are much more likely to acquire a disability at some point in time. Now, this may be a temporary disability. For example, I had surgery on my ankle a few years ago, and I was temporarily disabled because I was using a wheelchair, and then I was using crutches for several months. So that could be just a temporary disability due to an injury or due to surgery or whatever it is. But there's also a good chance that if you live long enough, you will acquire a permanent disability, something that affects you for the rest of your life. And that could be a physical disability. It could be a sensory disability having to do with your sight or your hearing. It could be a cognitive or psychosocial disability having something to do with your social interactions with other people or having to do with your way your brain processes information. So it's really important that we think about this when we're approaching something about disability rights that, again, for some people might seem far reserved from their experience. So we're all going to come into contact at some point in time with this issue of disability, either personally or we will have a friend, family member who experiences a disability themselves, and then we are going to have that connection to this issue. So disability rights affects us all. Now, I don't want to stop short of saying that this is a disability-specific issue. Universal design is a human issue. And I recently had the honor of appearing before a UN committee focused on economic, social, and cultural rights. And it's a really fun and bizarre story because I was going to Geneva for an entirely other meetings and seminars and things like that. I was not going to Geneva to talk to this committee. And I fly in and I land, and no sooner did I land, I get a notification on my phone and I look at it and it's an email from a UN.org email address, but not one that I recognized. So I was like, okay, let's just see what this is all about. And they said basically, hey, we would like to invite you to come and attend a seminar here that this committee is meeting on. And so that was kind of, an honor, and it was a shock, and I was very excited. So raced to the hotel frantically. I think it was the middle of the spring, so it was a little bit warm. I'm a little bit hot and sweaty. I get into the hotel room, I shower off real quick, I throw on my suit, and I head out to this venue, which is actually held in this gorgeous palace in Geneva. I didn't even know what I was getting into, but I go up to the venue and the whole thing is pretty well dark. And then there was a security guard out front, of course, big fences kind of protecting the building. And I go to the security guard and I say, hey, look, I got this email from this person. Can you tell me what's going on? And of course, they asked me for my passport. They called up the person and she came out and ushered me in. And so it was kind of a good feeling. I was kind of like, okay, what is this all about? This is going to be fun, or this is going to be a new experience. I'm ushered into this room, huge wood meeting table, and I sit down and I start to unpack my notebook and my pens and pencils and things like that. And I look up and I look around and everybody's kind of looking at me. And I sit there and I took a beat and I looked over to the person who had escorted me in and I said, so I guess I'm here to speak about my research. And she was like, yes, we want to hear about what you think this issue of universal design and how it might relate not to a disability-specific issue, but a broader human rights issue, and especially an issue regarding social welfare. So I was really, really kind of tickled that this was happening. And of course, I'm always ready to talk about universal design. And I launch into like a 30-minute lecture about what universal design is and why we're reconceptualizing universal design as a broader human rights issue and not a disability-specific issue, why universal design doesn't just relate to architecture or the built environment, why it's applicable to almost any aspect of society that requires any sort of decision-making. So I left that venue feeling really content and satisfied with my place in the world and the opportunity that I had to create impact.